Ahoy hoy, this is Michaela from Team Retro, where we like retro games and we like the devices that bring them to us. So I've been unusually impressed with the Anbernic Win600 to the point where I've spent the last month talking exclusively about this device. And despite some flaws and some issues that I have had with this specific unit, I find that this is my second most used retro handheld in my collection. This is the device that typically goes in my book bag and travels with me, and this is a device that if I don't have my Steam Deck, that I am reaching to next. And I've done 3 in-depth videos on the various experiences you can have with this device because it can handle multiple operating systems such as Windows, SteamOS, and Batocera. And if you haven't seen those videos, I'm going to put a link to each one of them in the video description. So that way, if you are interested in this device, you can do some research and you could find out which operating system is best for you and if this device works for your specific use case. And this video is just meant to be a general wrap-up of this device. So I'm going to talk about accessories that I've purchased for it, how I personally use this device, what's impressed me, and what still needs work. So let's dive in and let's get to work. Okay, let's start by taking a journey into Spec Town. Here we have an AMD Athlon Silver 3020E or 3050E, depending on which model you get, with a Dolly APU up to 2.6 or 2.8 gigahertz, again depending on the model that you purchase. You also get either a 128GB, 256GB, or 1TB M.2 SSD that is user replaceable, and you also get 8 or 16 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. This is single channel RAM, which many people say is one of the weaknesses of the device because it would perform better with dual channel RAM. So the model that I personally purchased was the 3050E model, so I got the 256 gigabyte storage. And I also got 8 gigabytes of RAM, and I personally upgraded the hard drive to a 512 Transcend drive, and I also purchased a 16 gigabyte single channel RAM stick. And in my previous videos on this device, I show you how to replace those if that's something that you are interested in doing. On all of the models, you get a 5.94-inch OCA laminated IPS screen with a max 720p resolution. Out of the box, it's going to come with Windows 10 Home pre-installed, but you can upgrade that to Windows 11, and you can also install SteamOS on the hard drive as well. You have Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 4.2. Both work really well for connecting wireless controllers as well as connecting to the internet, as well as what I believe to be the weakest aspect of this device, and that's the 4500 milliamp hour battery that's only going to get you about 2.5 hours of game time depending on what you're playing. Now, on Windows, there are ways that you can adjust the TDP to reduce the wattage and extend your battery life by a little bit, and supposedly you can do this on SteamOS too, but right now, at time of recording, that feature doesn't actually work on SteamOS. So there are technically some ways to squeeze out a little bit of extra battery life, but for me personally, I try not to think about it and just use the device for as long as I can. In my personal use case, I've actually been using this device for shorter game sessions, so the battery life hasn't really been an issue to me because I'm usually done playing it before the battery runs out. So let's take a look at some of the accessories that I am currently using with this device, and we're going to start with this Orsley Nintendo Switch case that just happens to fit the Anbernic Win600 very well. Now, this case was recommended by the Retro Tech Dad in one of his videos, and I'll leave a link in my video description to his channel because I do highly recommend you go check him out. But this case seems to have slots for Switch games, which I can use for my Batocera USB drive, and then it also has a spot where I can put in a charging cable and possibly a battery pack. Plus, it's one of those cases that actually slips over and protects the screen. Now, if you've seen any of my past videos, you'll notice that I stealthily put on some joystick grips that are actually meant for Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons, and these were actually just kicking around my house. I didn't actually make an effort to go out and purchase these, but they fit on the Win600 joysticks, so I figured they would be a good fit, and they do actually make the joysticks feel a little bit better. The ergonomics are still pretty bad, though. And unfortunately, that's a design of the product, not necessarily the grips themselves. And then the final accessory I bought for this device is also one that I'm going to use with my Steam Deck, and that's the Henhot 65-watt power bank. It's about $46 on Amazon, so it's a little bit more expensive than some other power banks out there. However, this produces the necessary wattage to actually charge the Win600 and the Steam Deck with a USB-C to USB-C cable. Now, if you decide to buy this battery pack, just keep in mind that USB-C to USB-C is the only way to charge this device. If you try to use the USB-A to USB-C, it won't dish out enough juice. You have to use the actual USB-C side. But that said, you will be able to get a little bit of extra juice out of your device without having to find a wall plug if you get this battery pack. Now, of all of the operating systems that this device can utilize, I actually chose to stick solely with SteamOS. Because ultimately, between Windows, SteamOS, and Batocera, I found that this operating system gave me the best balance overall between PC gaming and emulation, and the front end offers the best experience, in my opinion, between those two worlds. I can access my PC games for some light 2D gaming, like with Shovel Knight, or some older games that are in my Steam library that the Win600 can handle. And I can also utilize EmuDeck with Steam ROM Manager to boot right into some higher end emulation like Wii, GameCube, and even PS3, and 3DS right from the SteamOS front end, and I can use the Steam front end to customize unique control schemes for those emulators, as well as use the touchscreen for 3DS and Wii U games, which I'm going to get into a little later in this video. But before I do that, I want to get into a serious issue that I found while running SteamOS on this device. And this seems to be an issue unique to this specific build of SteamOS. And that's the fact that I put it into sleep mode one day and put it in that case I showed you earlier, and then put it in my book bag. And about half an hour later, I took it out again and realized that the device was really hot and the fan was just cranking. So what happened was that SteamOS froze up while in sleep mode, and unfortunately during that period when the device got really hot, it actually took out some of the adhesive that was holding the screen in place here on the top. So you could see that my screen has actually popped up a little bit. And I can push it back down into place and it will stay in place for a little bit, but then over time, because there's nothing really keeping it holding in place, it ends up popping back up again. And honestly, if I'm looking at the device head on, I don't see it. And it's OCA laminated, so I don't think that dust will get under it in the long term. But it's still frustrating that a bug in the operating system caused the device to get super hot and caused this physical damage to it. And it's not going to keep me from recommending this device, but it is going to make me warn you not to put this device in sleep mode if you're going to be putting it in a case or a book bag. and just shut the device off instead. Now, I also want to point out that I upgraded the RAM on this device and did go into the BIOS and change the timings, and that may have something to do with it as well, so you might not have this issue if you are using the stock RAM and timings. However, the timing that I am using is stock on the blue model, which comes with 16 gigabytes of 3200 megahertz RAM. So I don't necessarily think that's the issue. I think the issue is solely based in SteamOS and a bug that's potentially with sleep mode. So you could be running Windows on this device and not have any of these problems at all, but it did happen to me. So if you set up the device the same way I did and you're using the settings in the BIOS that I used in my previous videos, then it is something that could potentially happen to you. So you may just want to avoid sleep mode altogether unless you're only going to be putting it asleep for a short amount of time and setting it on a table or something, not putting it in a case. Now, I could try to reach out to Anbernic to try and get this fixed or replaced, but I changed the RAM and the hard drive, and I feel by doing that I may have voided my warranty. So I'm just going to live with it for now, and if I decide that it's really bothering me, I may pick up the 3020E model because it's a little bit cheaper, and I'll just swap the hard drive and the RAM into that device. But for now, it's fine. It's not bothering me enough to make an issue of it, but I did want to make you aware that it happened. So now let's talk about some of my favorite games to play on this device, and ironically, I'm probably going to uninstall Final Fantasy XIV just because it plays it decently, but I find myself just going back to the Steam Deck for that particular game. However, this game that I'm loading up here, Trails in the Sky, I was a little frustrated with it at first because I thought that I wasn't going to be able to customize the controls. However, I found that if you actually go into the controller configuration for this game and you go to input and turn off the controller and keep the keyboard enabled, then go ahead and go into the controller settings and you'll actually find a community member who mapped all of the buttons to the corresponding keyboard key. And I did a little tiny bit of editing just to fit my specific needs, and you might want to do the same. But if you're interested in The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky and you want to play it on either this device or the Steam Deck, that is the best way to play it, because if you try to keep the controller settings on, things are just going to get weird and wonky. And I'm trying to make my way through this game. I'm only at the beginning, but I got interested in this game because it was featured on the Steam Machine podcast. And I listen to that podcast. I actually support them on Patreon as well as hang out in their Discord channel. And they're really good people, so you should definitely check them out. And check this game out while you're at it because it is actually pretty fun. I'm looking forward to progressing in it. Now let's move on to a game that I'm really enjoying that requires no configuration, and that's Shovel Knight Dig. This game will work on the Win600 right out of the box, and this is a fun little roguelike featuring Shovel Knight. And the game is hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think it's actually harder than the original Shovel Knight game, but at the same time, it's also a lot of fun, and I hope that I can actually be good enough at this game to progress because I am enjoying my time with it. And this is actually a good pick up and play game for me. And that's the context in which this device really shines. It's good for pick up and play experiences when you only have a short amount of time to game. Another decent experience I had with this device was with the Capcom Arcade Stadium packs, and these are a series of a la carte Capcom arcade games where you can buy only the ones that you want to play, or you can buy all of the games that are available in a bundle. And both Capcom Arcade Stadium as well as Capcom Arcade Second Stadium will often go on sale, so you might be better off just waiting for a sale and then picking up the entire package. And I've never really been a fan of emulating CPS 1, 2, and 3 on the older emulation platforms because I would often have different compatibility issues. But in this experience with this device, it actually just works out of the box and was worth the price of admission, in my opinion. Only thing that I really had to do for optimal performance was go into the quick settings and drop the frames per second cap to 30 because I found that it was just a little janky otherwise, but these games all work well on this device. And I'm finding with the Win600 as well as with the Steam Deck, which is my other SteamOS device, that if I have the opportunity to play a classic game through a PC collection rather than through emulation, I will take full advantage of that opportunity. So instead of emulating Ninja Turtles games through Emulation Station or RetroArch, I just opted to pick up the Cowabunga collection and I can have the same experience in a more optimized package, as well as all of the extra behind the scenes content that's typically offered with those collections, and it gives me an opportunity to just have all of the Turtles games that I want in just 2 games without any extra setup. And it goes without saying that I can also play the Steam version of Shredder's Revenge, which is the newest Turtle game to be released this year. So on the Win600, I can have something that's more portable than a Steam Deck, that runs the Steam Deck OS, that plays all of the games that I would have been playing on the Steam Deck anyway, but is more travel friendly. And I also have access to the SteamOS desktop mode, which allows me to install packages such as EmuDeck. And so I decided to test out the beta version of EmuDeck that is currently making the rounds on the EmuDeck Discord. And it still runs well, it just streamlines the experience into a menu interface as opposed to all separate icons on the desktop, but it also features a quick settings option which lets you change the resolution of some systems, as well as add LCD or CRT shaders, and change the bezels if you want to turn them on or off. And so again, thanks to Retro Tech Dad, I have been testing the limits as to what the Win600 can actually emulate, and I was quite pleased to find out that there are some PS3 games out there, such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time Reshelled. Now, I have an Xbox 360 with this game on it downloaded because this was actually delisted because Ubisoft lost the license, and this game has not really been heavily praised because it was connected to a later version of the Turtle show. And so, from a preservation standpoint, it's great to be able to play a game like this on the Win600 and not have to worry about only being able to play it on my Xbox 360 because there's no telling what happens if that hard drive goes. I may never be able to download it again, so I'm glad that I have it preserved in ROM format on this device. And I'm also playing through Kirby Return to Dreamland for the Wii on this device because it looks phenomenal, and I was finally able to finagle the controller schemes in order to actually be able to play it. I would always have issues with this game in the past, and it really is not only a beautiful game, but one that runs very well at 60 frames per second. This game will be getting released to the Switch, they're remaking it, but I'm perfectly content to play through the original here. And I was even able to map L2 to be able to simulate shaking a Wiimote, so we're not losing functionality here either. My next challenge is to try and get Super Paper Mario running on this device. Now, there have been a lot of improvements to the 3DS emulation scene with Citra, and I'm very pleased to say that that has carried over to the Win600 as well. So whereas in some of my past videos on the Steam Deck, 3DS games have kind of had a little bit of jank, including the Pokemon games, that jank has been significantly reduced, and the more you play the game, the more the shaders will catch up, and the more stable the game will appear. The only thing that I really had to do with 3DS is drop the frames per second cap to 30 because I don't think they're really meant to be played at 60 frames per second, and they just seem to run a little bit more stable. And I have full use of the touchscreen, but I also set the L3 button to switch the screens because there are going to be times where you need to use the touchscreen and the screen on the right is just a little bit too small. And the best example I can give of that is during Super Training in Pokemon X because you have to use the touchscreen in order to actually shoot the soccer balls and aim them, where you use the left stick in order to just move the character around. And I just found it easier to be able to switch the screen so that I could see both of them equally rather than have the big giant screen and the smaller screen, which affected my aim. And it's nice to be able to do that for some games on the fly, and it actually makes 3DS emulation actually seem like a thing that's happening. But let's not stop there. There are some Switch games you can actually emulate on this device as well, Metroid Dread being one of them. Now, I don't emulate a lot of Switch games because I would rather just play them on the Switch, but one of my requirements for a really good handheld is the ability to play all 5 2D Metroid games. And so while I find it a little bit uncomfortable to play Metroid Dread on this device, the analog sticks are also configured a little weird, so I just found myself really struggling with moving around. However, I'm wondering if I can map the controls to move Samus around to the D-pad, and if that'll make things a little bit easier here. That might also affect free aim mode though, so I'm kind of reluctant to try it, but I might report back in a future video. Now, all of my lower end games I actually keep behind Emulation Station Desktop Edition just to not clutter my home menu on SteamOS. And you can see this is a very clean interface that has scraped box art and just does a very good job housing all of my older games. You can also go into a specific game and set alternative emulators just by editing the metadata. So here I'm actually setting Kirby's Dream Land 2 to use MGBA instead of Gambate because MGBA will actually have that Super Game Boy compatibility. And I'll be able to take full advantage of the Super Game Boy enhancements that came with these games. Now, another thing that I'm learning how to do with these older systems is to change the controller configuration on a per game basis. So if I go into the RetroArch menu and go down to controls, I can actually go to port 1 controls and change the layout of the A, B, X, and Y buttons. So what I do is I set the A button to be A on the actual physical button, and I set the B button to X. And then I set Y and B to be turbo controls. And then once I've set the controls how I want, I can go back and go to Manage Remap Files and Save Game Remap File. And that will save my controller configuration to just this specific game. And so now next time I play Kirby's Dream Land 2, I'll get that Super Nintendo-like control scheme, and it'll just be more comfortable and more ergonomic to play. And I did the same thing here for Super Mario Bros. 3 for the NES. And the game looks really good at its 4:3 aspect ratio. You don't even really notice the black bars on the right and the left. And it plays really well, and it's comfortable. Now, for handheld systems, I turned the LCD shader on in EmuDeck, and it just provides this little nice shader over the screen and makes the handheld games like Game Boy Advance here look a little bit more retro, and it actually does provide a nice look that's more authentic to the original system. You could turn this off if you want to, but I personally left it on because I thought it looked cool. And here's the obligatory PSP test. This is Mega Man powered up using PPSSPP at a 720p resolution, and you can see here that with the 16:9 screen, it looks very good, and most, if not all, PSP games will look equally good when you play them on this device. Now really quick, let's just dock the system into my capture card just to show you what the docked experience looks like. And I didn't do anything special here, I just plugged the unit in and it showed up on my monitor, no problem. And let's just jump into a Game Boy Advance game just so you could see that LCD shader at work, and it still looks really phenomenal. Now, I'm horribly bad at F-Zero games, so I'm going to spare you the torture and just move on to GameCube. And the reason I'm deciding to highlight Paper Mario Thousand Year Door here is because this game often has graphical issues or freezes on other devices, but on this one, it seems to be running really well at a 720p resolution. And my gauge as to whether GameCube works well on a device or not is actually this screen here. This is a moment in the game where there's just a lot of assets on screen, and if a system can not only show this information but not edit out the characters, show graphical issues, or slow down, then that's an indication that GameCube is going to run really well on this device. And as you can see, that scene played out with no problem at all. And just for good measure, we'll throw out a little bit of Chrono Trigger for SNES running with a normal 2x filter. And this is one of my favorite ways to play Chrono Trigger. It actually looks very good. Now let's look at PC gaming in docked mode. We're going to start with Horizon Chase Turbo at 720p resolution. And anything that can play handheld on the Win600 will play docked mode on the Win600 just as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and let a couple of PC games play in docked mode just so you could see what they look like. And I just want to take a quick look at the Batocera experience because Batocera 35 has just been released, and it did fix a couple issues that I had mentioned in my last video. One being that the screen no longer needs to be rotated 90 degrees, it just works right out of the box. But they also tried to incorporate touchscreen controls into this build of Batocera, and it seems like it works just fine out of the box. But then when you go to use the touchscreen in a game like Kirby Planet Robobot, which is a 3DS game that can utilize the bottom touchscreen, unlike in SteamOS, it does not recognize the touchscreen at all. I kind of was able to move a mouse pointer with my finger, but that was pretty much the extent of it. I wasn't actually able to issue commands using the touchscreen. And then when I exited out of the game, I found that on the menu, the touchscreen no longer worked, and the only way to get the touchscreen working again would be to restart the whole system. And I'm just going to run the updater here just to show you that I am indeed on the latest version at time of recording, so these issues are present right now on the latest version. However, one last thing to point out about these updates to Batocera is that there is a sleep mode now. So if you press the start button and you go to quit, one of the options is going to be to suspend system. And you can go ahead and press that and it will put the system to sleep, and then you could just press the power button on the left to start it back up again. However, I'm not sure if this will give the same issues that I had with SteamOS with putting the system to sleep. So I'm just going to reiterate, kind of stay away from sleep mode on this system for now. And coming back from sleep mode doesn't fix any of the touchscreen issues that are still present once you exit a game. All right, let's wrap up this whole experience with commendations and condemnations. And this is going to be on the device as a whole, not just an operating system. We're going to look at the entire device this time. And we're going to start with that versatile OS compatibility. You can put 3 OSs, soon to be 4, on this device. And so, whatever your use case is, this device can adapt to it. And that includes whether you want to primarily have this device be handheld or if you want to also use it in docked mode. When you are in handheld mode, D-pad gaming is comfortable, and that's really where this device shines, is that D-pad centric gaming. So retro games as well as PC games that utilize the D-pad will be a good time on this device. And I'm actually happy to have a smaller device that functions very similarly to a Steam Deck. Now, I absolutely adore the Steam Deck, however, in some cases, it really is just too big. So having a device that does similar things but can fit in a book bag and be easily transported for travel is definitely a win in my book, and that's not a pun, that is just a fact. The emulation potential on this device is actually higher than I expected, especially when I upgraded some of the internal components. And I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that this device is available for now. You can order it and get it within a couple of weeks, as opposed to with the Steam Deck having to order it and maybe get it at the end of the year. However, Valve is ramping up production on the Steam Deck, so we're going to get into Condemnations because there are some important conversations here that need to be had. Mostly that there is a price to performance issue. This device starts at $300 and the Steam Deck starts at $400, but the Steam Deck is a much more powerful device. And so over time, the Win600's importance is going to be diminished when Steam Deck systems start becoming more readily available. And some other things I'm not a fan of are the analog stick issues, not just the ergonomics, but the fact that they are calibrated to be a little bit too sensitive, and I really haven't found a workaround as of recording. And because I opted to use SteamOS, there's some hardware buttons on this device that no longer work because this was a device meant for Windows. So there's a keyboard button on the side that I can't use because it doesn't work in SteamOS. Likewise, I really wish the Windows button actually opened up the quick settings, and I'm hoping that's something that's fixed in a future update. Because there were times where I really needed to pull up a keyboard and I just had to go get a Bluetooth keyboard and plug it in. And of course, I had that issue with sleep mode, and so I have to repeat, and I'll say it a million times, with this particular device, you may just want to not use sleep mode if you're going to be storing the device or putting it in a book bag for travel. Just turn the thing off. And so, in the end, was I happy to spend money on this device? Yes, I was, because I got a good experience, and it is a device that I use on a regular basis. However, that doesn't mean that there are not issues with this device, and depending on your use case, this may not be the device for you. But I do have to say that I did do my research and I knew what I was getting myself into with purchasing this device, so having those expectations in check really helped me enjoy this device that much more. I just wish that it didn't have that issue and my screen isn't popped up a little bit. But that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you love this device, or is this something that you are going to skip in favor of something better? Again, thank you so much for watching, and if this device was helpful to you in any way, please be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.